All right, so got domestic violence, service provision, and the architecture of rural life, an Australian case study. So we got the introduction. What is the article meant to do? Well, it explores a study that explores the quality, efficiency, and availability or domestic violence service provision in Australia. Aims to present the findings of a qualitative study into the challenges experienced by the domestic violence service providers in rural Australia. It also argues that urban-shaped policy models are inadequate for the issues faced in rural areas in regards to domestic violence. So now that we're introduced, 2.1, what is rural? Much like in class, they touch upon the fact that the definition of rural is sort of up in the air and open to debate, trying to link spatiality and spatiality, I don't know, and what is rural has caused issues to narrowing down one single definition. Rural studies have been hung up on the romantic images of the countryside and on perceived agriculture rather than what is really going on in rural areas. Now, to consider something rural through this paper, the domestic violence service providers took a consistent measurement from the town to an urban center. What is rural in Australia? Australia is a sparsely populated continent with huge expanses of unoccupied territory. It is also one of the most urbanized nations in the world, where only 30% of its people live outside the capital cities. Rural Australia is far less multicultural than metropolitan Australia. So keep that in mind as the study is conducted. What is DV? Other than an abbreviation for domestic violence, it includes physical and sexual assault and other forms of domination, such as economic deprivation, and psychological abuse and social isolation. This broad type of violence and abuse is perpetuated with within a variety of interpersonal relationships such as siblings, child and parent care relationships, and extended familial relationships. The service provision's main purpose is to provide support and protection for victims. Violence and the architecture of rural life. This article aims to change the modern theory of what rural life is like because a crime-free rural life is inaccurate. In Australia and America, interpersonal crime rates are higher than people believe. While the data relies on police reports, the highest rates for violent crimes were consistently located in regional and rural areas. This was a study, direct quote I pulled from the article that I thought was important. The Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research provides the annual rankings of the top 50 LGAs. LGAs is local government areas, or something like that. So annual rankings of the top 50 LGAs with the highest rate of reported domestic violence incidences per 100,000 population. At this time of the study, in 2011, 46 LGAs in the top 50 with the highest rate of domestic violent assaults were located in regional and rural New South Wales. So, thought that was an important stat we should know. All right, 3.0 research methods. Now, this gives you an idea, kind of the study that they conducted. The article explains how it draws on a study that took place from 2007 to 2008 in New South Wales from 49 service providers. These providers varied from criminal justice agencies and health and welfare services across 12 local government areas and ranging in population size from 3,000 to 55,000 people. 3.1. Now, this gives you an idea of the participants and who they were. 16% of the interviewed service providers were male, and 84% were female. It showed that in communities with less than 20,000 people, there was a lack of community development or support, women's court support to pull people from an interview, as opposed to large areas of cities where you had those programs and you had more community development. Those weren't available for anybody. Any of those service providers were not available because those services just aren't available in these areas. The general age of the interviewees was 35 to 50, although I did think that a couple of them said that they were 60 plus because they were retired. So, but average age, there you go. Qualitative interview, 3.2. Questions posed to each participant in the study vary according to the jobs of the service providers. For example, interviews with various health workers focused on questions about the government agencies, domestic violence, screening policy, and with police, asking about how their procedures to responding to domestic violence reports. All right, now we're going to go to findings. Personal shame in being a domestic violence victim is a huge part of why these victims, these rural women, remain silent, and it is difficult for service providers to access them. This may lead to the underuse of domestic violence service providers and underreporting. Heightened family privacy leaves victims isolated, and when women break their silence and seek help, the distance between major service centers and where they live can make it difficult for services to operate efficiently or even operate at all. Now we're going back to personal shame, first thing we mentioned in there, and underuse of domestic violence intervention services. This is where I started to pull quotes and talk about them because I thought the quotes from the people being interviewed was the most important part of the study. So here's one from a community health social worker. I don't think people want to be identified. That's the problem. In small communities, there's stigma associated with having problems. So if you get talked about, you're in a big place or city, you can go. If you get talked about, if you're in a big place or city, you can go to a service and no one knows you. But when you front up here, everyone knows that you have a problem. Here's another quote. One client who's in a domestically violent relationship, not many people know her husband's in a high position in the town who beats her, really bad, and she'll try to hide it. She'll come in with a black eye and bruises and tell everyone she had a bad car accident. Another time she says she slipped in the bath, or she'll avoid and come into town for a while. She'll run out of excuses. She can't keep saying she had a car accident again. This is from a family counselor. We went over these topics in class about shame, fear, embarrassment, not feeling like you have anywhere to go because everybody knows you in a small town. So that, nothing new there, but, you can kind of see some more examples of it. I'll move on to family privacy and visibility of service use. Here's a quote from a counselor. I think family business is still something to be quite private, should be private, and people want it to be private. They don't want to splash across their front lawn and would like to facilitate it as a private issue. Family's family, but when you have there's a line that can't be crossed. There can't be criminal activity. There can't be abuse. And that's where family, the family circle needs to be, widened, because you got to go outside of that because you need to report it. If there's something going on. this woman that works on a farm. She puts up with abuse because she feels like she has nothing to live for. The husband owns the farm. She works on the farm, looks after the kids, and she doesn't have any other work experience or qualifications. This is from a church-based outreach counselor. Um, yeah, I mean, women don't, these victims don't feel like they have anywhere else to go, anywhere else to live for. So, I think there's more quotes on that, but it's a good quoting, showing that, they feel isolated, they feel alone. So, breaking the silence and facing the tyranny of distance. A client who's from a farming family left her husband because of abuse. She had lost most of her close friends. People didn't ask why she left. They just sided with her husband. This woman is living on her own, but she finds it very hard. Uh, she is very lonely because she's had no family in town, and her adult children live somewhere else. From a community health social worker. They feel alone. They have nowhere else to go. They're so dependent on their husbands, and obviously, this quote saying people just picking sides, not really knowing why, she left. That's hard. And then the second quote, they're going through domestic violence. All their assets are tied up in the settlement with a very obstructive partner, and they can't get payments. They can't get access to department housing because they have too many assets, but they can't live in their house because it's not safe, or they're physically barred by their husband from doing so. But they get very trapped because they can't access services because of their income barrier. This is another tough one, that they just can't be helped. So again, that feeling of isolation, that feeling of there's nowhere to go, or I shouldn't leave because, what if I can't get help from these people who are supposed to help me? Who can help me? Last section. Just because they have the income doesn't mean that they can access it because it's tied up or in the house, the joint names. If you can't live in it, you can't access it. Fat load of good it's doing you. All it's doing is stopping you from accessing these services. This goes right along with the last quote. So right along with it of, if these people can't help me who are supposed to help me, I can't leave. Next quote, last quote. While the majority of our clients are low income, this is not always the case. Sometimes we house women who are on the higher income bracket and have a higher level of education. They can also have needs because of the loss of the social group that happens with the marriage breakdown. What happens in a marriage is friends of wives and friends of the husband. So when they divorce, everybody goes. Everybody can be a victim. Not just low income. So, and then the last tidbit or fact, limited programs to support women to leave violent situations, such as employment opportunities, affordable and accessible public transport, housing, social support, child health care, and make it challenging for rural workers to implement a coordinated response. So, lack of these programs kind of prevent women from getting help. And then two questions I had for you guys at the end. Which quote did you find the most eye-opening / helpful in the study, and why? And then what strategies would you propose in order to lower the amount of domestic violence in rural areas? More policing, more support groups, etc. Or do you think that victims are always going to tend to remain silent and not seek the help that they need? So that's it. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it.